Alright, for this video, I'm going to be responding to Cameron Bertuzzi of Capturing Christianity fames with another 3 questions for atheists video. He had 3 pretty basic questions, and I already had something mostly written for this sort of a question, so I kind of wanted to give him a response. He asked 3 basic questions. The first 2 are very easy. First is, do you believe that there is no God? And yes, I believe there is no God. I don't do what is called lacktheism. I don't say I lack a belief in God anymore. I think that's misguided. So I make the affirmative, yes, there is no God. So that's his first question. I'm pretty sure he's happy with that. The second question he has is, do I accept evidentialism, i.e. the idea that we should, our beliefs should be apportioned to the evidence? And so obviously not yes, but with all the caveats that Cameron is well aware of in terms of not all of our beliefs can be apportioned to the evidence. There has to be some sort of foundationalism thing that goes along, that we have beliefs that are properly basic, not evidence based. So I do not hold that my atheism is properly basic, to use the language of Plantinga's Reformed epistemology that I believe Cameron holds to. Although ironically, my young daughters, actually have a properly basic belief that there is no God because I told them that there is no God. And if you read a lot of contemporary defenders of Plantinga's Reformed epistemology, a properly basic belief can be based on testimony from a trusted source, like a parent, specifically in the case of a child. But that's not me. I'm not saying my atheism is properly basic. So the final question Cameron asks is, what evidence do you have that there is no God? And this is where the meat is. So first, I want to define what God is. I should note I'm responding to Cameron from Capturing Christianity, not Capturing Theism. So we have a very specific conception of God here. The idea of a monotheistic God is that it is defined as omnipotent, or all-powerful, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnibenevolent, all good. Typically, in the Abrahamic tradition, when we're working with omnibenevolence, it is understood in this context to mean perfectly loving. That is, God cannot fail to love any being that he creates. What I'm going to describe is commonly known as the problem of evil, but I frame these problems in terms of love because while I think we can get into the weighty metaphysical territory about what is love or what is goodness and evil, I think most of us, or at least I, certainly have a very good understanding of what love is. I'm in love with my wife. I'm in love with my 2 children, dearly. There are certain actions that are effectively out of bounds for me to do to my children, specifically because I love them. Because I love them, I could not torture them. I could not force them to go through incredible amounts of trauma or loss. I couldn't avoid doing all that I could to provide for their well-being, at least now while they are so young and they're in my charge. If I did any of those things, people would rightly conclude I didn't love my kids. I like to say that theistic apologists have a severe underappreciation for what is logically possible, and God, typically defined, can do anything logically possible. So given the possibilities of what and how God could have created, there are scenarios that could have been used to create a perfect world from the get-go. I think this is a real defeater specifically for the Christian picture of how things will go, but I think it extends to theism more generally because of how we're defining God. Because I know what love is and what actions are not consistent with love, I cannot help but conclude that there is no God. Looking at the incredible amount of pain, suffering, and death that exists in the world, especially what is entailed by the evolutionary process, I conclude that a loving God cannot use such a process to bring about our existence. This is all the more true if you believe God had an active role in selecting the different selection effects and branches that our evolutionary path took, meaning there's a new problem of teleological evil or suffering, where some of the horrific suffering and death is literally designed into the system. This gets compounded when we again consider how incredibly broad logical possibility is in terms of other methods a loving God could use to create whatever it wanted. There didn't need to be a world limited by resources. We didn't have to need things like food or shelter. If things like making free choices about whether to worship God is supposed to be the most important thing in existence, Well, then we could have just been created as spiritual beings without needing resources to sustain ourselves or we could avoid pain and death. We could have just contemplated the most important questions in relationships and not have to worry about material needs. This problem becomes all that much more acute when you consider God didn't just decide to create us. He also specifically got to design and choose what our natures are going to be like. This is basically unlike any sort of act of creation we are currently capable of. The closest conception would be creating an artificial intelligence. Even there, when we theorize about such things, we consider building certain features into the nature of AI, things like Asimov's laws, where by their nature, the robots or AI can't harm humans. In fact, it's not hard to imagine how the world could have been this way. Theists already have a very great conception of it. It's called heaven. God simply could have created everyone in heaven. Instead, we find not only are we created in a world where there are all these dependencies, needs, and capacity for physical pain, but we also find that we are created by one of the most cruel and brutal processes that could be imagined, biological evolution. This is simply not an act of creation that is consistent with a being who loves us. Now, what's important to note here is that I am framing things in terms of love, and so you can't say, well, you can't have this problem, you can't have evil because you're describing the problem of evil without God. No. This is consistency with the concept of love. So I don't even need to appeal to moral things like good and evil, just consistency with what I know love to be. Now, of course, there are lots of things theists can say in response to this. They propose theodicies or just so stories about why God has to allow suffering or appeal to unknown, morally justifiable reasons for God to allow this state of affairs. But I really don't find any arguments or explanations like that to be convincing. And this leaves me firmly convinced that God, so defined, doesn't exist. Thanks for watching.